No, I want to discuss this in a second, but I'll set it up like this, right? Years and years ago, literally we talk like 10 years ago now, there was a fight in the UFC. And one of the things is, because from esports, I'm totally cool with spoilers. Like, I want to watch how it happened, not what the result is. Like, it's not,
Yeah.
I'm fine with being spoiled. I basically had that thing where, because the UFC was always on it, like, it used to start at 3 a.m. in the UK. So I would often just wake up the next day, go to a website and watch the game, right? And unfortunately, when I did this, right, I was going to watch the fight between Anderson Silva and Chael Sonnen, the first one that happened, right? And if people don't know, this was like a really epic fight, but it was mega unexpected because the underdog was basically winning this fight for 4.5 out of 5 rounds. And what happened was, when I was going to the site, sadly, I saw a fucking spoiler very briefly before I clicked the video, where like I basically saw it said Anderson Silva wins the fight, right? So you'll see where this analogy is going if you know the fight I'm talking about. So I sit down and I'm watching the fight, and right, remember, all I've gotten spoiled at this point, Amazing, is the winner. I don't know how he does it yet. And in this fight, like I say, for 4.5 of the rounds, the guy who was supposed to lose this fight is just dominating. Like, he's constantly in top position. He's ground and pound. He's winning on the feet. He's never, ever in danger, right? So I'm watching it, and I'm actually starting to think at one point in time, like, was that fake news or something? Was that like an old fight? What are they? There's just no way this guy. And then what happened was, out of nowhere, right? Anderson Silva did a triangle choke and won the fight at the end of the fight, right? So the same thing happened today, Monte. I woke up. I didn't watch this game live. It was on in the morning. I woke up and I saw the result. And it said Gen G wins in the 5th game, right? And when I was watching the 5th game, I've posted on YouTube the video from it, right? When I was watching the fucking 5th game, it's the same thing. I'm watching. I'm going. They must be talking about a different game because Peanut, he's so far behind in this game. They can't win. Like, look, he's basically just getting like fucking his soul owned. He hasn't even had any farm for the first like 4 minutes. So I'm like, there's no way. Yeah. And also, we all think Kanye's like the best jungler in the world. He might be the best Korean player along with Keria. Like, I was like, they must just win this. And the same thing, I was just watching the whole thing. Like, how are they possibly going to lose this game? Like, mate, there's 2 things we have to talk about in this game. One, this Nidalee pick, because you can see how fragile this shit is right now if it ever goes south. And then 2, it's like the discussion we were having before bounties the other week, Monte. You, in the modern day, and this is going to be really, really hard for League of Legends players, if you're in the position Peanut is in, you can't play like this was 3 years ago and it's any time in the game. You actually have to play it differently in your decision making, depending on the bounties and the situation in the game. Like, you actually have to factor that in, and no player's doing it because it's a new world in that regard. Like, essentially, if people don't know, it was very easy how they gave this game away. And it actually shows, like, I think people have seen this in a bunch of regions now, because I saw Peter Dunn was complaining about this. It feels like there isn't that, depending on what time in the game it is, your ability to lose the game can be incredibly different to other points in the match. Like, what do you think about this topic? Because to me, it's making the game a lot different from old League of Legends.
I mean, I personally really don't like the bounty system. And as Peter Dunnick, he said this in comparison with, like, he made a scale, right, between 1 and 10.
I thought his tweet was really good.
It was very insightful, yeah.
Yeah, and it was like the way that expanded is something that we've seen in the past too, right? We had some metas, for example, in season 8. I think there was this summer meta where you had the comeback mechanics in the jungle, where basically if you were like even a level down or even just a bit of XP down, you suddenly got like transported way further.
Catch up XP, yeah.
Through every camp. So that meant, like, even counter picks, for historical counter picks such as Kindred into Sejuani or Olaf into Sejuani didn't actually work that well, because simply Sejuani would just take one more camp and suddenly should be very much at your level. So you had to kind of understand, well, why would I play a 1 comp or like I think he explained like 10 was the fastest comp, whatever it is. Let's say 10 is the fastest comp. Why would I play 10 comp if I can get away with like a 3-4 comp every single game and just play slower and be okay with it? And I think now it's partially the same, though it is very much it feels more volatile than it has in the past. Like, the consistency in bounties is obviously there. We obviously know the gold accumulation at some point. We know that, okay, well, they're the bounties, they do this and whatever it is, but it still doesn't feel real when you're actually playing the game, because it feels so volatile. So when you're playing the game, and that's what I've noticed as I've been practicing more and more again, is that you play, you get ahead, you get like a 7k gold lead, 8k gold lead by 20 minutes, and suddenly you have like one bounty like being struck, and the way that it's being struck compared to how impactful it is feels really off. So bounty is struck suddenly like a k further, only 7k ahead instead of 8k ahead, and it doesn't seem to have the same effect as taking the Nashor, while actually in terms of gold value almost is like the same in some situations, right? So for me, that is the weirdest thing ever. Or losing a turret, like losing all 5 plates, is kind of the same gold value that you're always almost seeing in some bounty systems. So for me, that feels really fucking weird to actually see, because the game feels too volatile and it doesn't feel trackable to the point that you actually just have to rely on late game and be like, okay, we're just going to hope that we're going to win at some point, because that is a safer system. Because in case we do something wrong, these bounty systems will carry us to the goal. And I think it has to become more consistent in a way that, I mean, the impact versus like what's happening on the map has to be a lot greater. Like if a bounty is hit, for example, like you literally have to have your ears ring or whatever it is, and the noise has to be louder, or something has to happen that you get like a flash up on the screen. It's like minus 1,000 gold or whatever it is, so like plus 1,000 gold, whatever it is. And it has to be more impactful, and that's what it is. In most of the pro games, you see the same way. Like people shy away from this because they are scared and they don't know. They simply don't know. They don't understand the impact of these bounties within the moment. And I think the best example of it was the G2 Misfits game, where they threw like 3-4 times in a row,
yes.
and they didn't realize at any point that they were threatened to the point that they were. They didn't know, because it was so hard to track. Like you just didn't know. You don't. It's not the same as it used to be, where the comeback XP maybe did something. Maybe some of the shutdowns that you got. The bounties make it untrackable and make the jumps way more grave. That's what it is. It's jumps. It's not a scale. It's literally jump from one to another. At some point, you're down in gold where you shouldn't be, just because you played well earlier.
Well, the game also
I will say, like, as even though obviously I'm not a player, so I can't claim to know from that side. I also find them very like counterintuitive how the bounties are calculated. Like the amount of times you see a game where the mid lane is up 15 CS and he has the bounty with like a 0-0-2 scoreline, and then the jungler's like 4-1 and 2 on Olaf, and you're like, why doesn't he have a bounty? Like you're like, I don't even know if it's intuitive how they're calculated, dude.
No, I mean, when you're playing, like, it doesn't feel intuitive, because it doesn't seem as if it actually tracks the very game state. And one has to understand too, there are multiple game states at the same time, right? It's, first of all, you have the gold, then you have the, like, and at some point when you accumulate enough gold, you obviously have the item differences happening, but vice versa, you also have the scaling difference in the champions, right? And like the level difference, whatever. So like 4 or 5 different scales in which in which the game's operating on, and you literally have like one thing that is tracking one thing only, but it impacts every single other scale. So for me, that is like the wild part about it.
I mean, I've seen gold bounties pop up because a team has Dragon Soul, even though they're 1k gold ahead.
Yeah.
I mean,
it just sucks.
Like, and the thing is that the game itself doesn't, like, the problem is that League of Legends, and part of what your job is as a professional player or commentator or analyst, is that you need to be able to evaluate the game state, because gold is worth different amounts depending on items and champions that exist in the game. And so the whole thing is that you could have an even game state with a 5,000 gold lead and in the mid game, because you need that 5,000 gold in order to make the game even. And that's the purpose of selecting this composition. Yeah. And to explain Peter Dunn's point, what he tweeted out was like, imagine there's a scale from 1 to 10, and 1 is like the biggest scaling composition and 10 is like the biggest early composition. The point that he makes is that you usually, like, what you're trying to do a lot of the time is, like, if a team picks like a 7 or an 8, so a pretty early game composition, you want to try and land at like a 6, right? So that you have like a slight scaling advantage, but can kind of keep up in the early game. And that would be like the sweet spot, for example. Obviously, this is a simplification, guys, but it's useful for discussing the game in its current state. And what he says is basically that he doesn't feel right now that you can even pick like 8 through 10, like very early game compositions, because the rubber band mechanics are so severe. It was, by the way, guys, it was always a risk. It was always a risk to take early game compositions versus scaling compositions, because there was a huge risk that if you misplay in the mid and late game, that the comeback would start before gold bounty has existed. And then they introduced champion gold bounties, and now they introduce objective gold bounties. So it's like it's multiplying like the level of comeback potential. And sure, there were things that we can talk about Damwon doing wrong in that game.
Of course, yeah.
Should they have punished Peanut as hard when there are already comeback mechanics in the jungle and he's playing Hecarim and it's going to be relevant because he has an E and an ult later on anyway? Should they have started Dragon like dragon stacking earlier? Probably they should have done that. I would say that
they also fucked up a bunch of team fights against Chovy, etc.
They fucked up a bunch of team fights. They overpressed their advantage. They gave 1,000 gold shutdown over to Ruler Xayah, which was a huge misplay on an individual level by Canyon. There were problems, but like Canyon shouldn't have to absolutely dominate this game and die once and then they're back in it. Like that's unacceptable. Like how good of a performance does this guy have to have in order for that? Like he can't make 0 mistakes in a game. That's like humanly impossible.
If this was like 7 years ago, the beginning of the game starts like that. Spoiler, it just keeps going like that, and he is in the Nightmare Simulator, Peanut, and the game ends, and he's had the most humiliating beatdown ever in a game fight. Like, there's no comeback from that like 7 years ago. Like, it's over. Like, in fact, the people might remember the classic MSI Fnatic series where everyone remembers, I remember Featherman was killing. Everyone forgets, like, Game 5 was the one where they, like, fucking triple buffed, like, Cyanide or whatever, and just left him in, like, Rainover, rather, and they would, with Nunu, and they just couldn't play the game, and T1 just shit stomped them. Like, that was going to happen in this game except for these mechanics.
Yeah,
because the reason I bring it up, right, is that this might sound like a weird point because it's abstract, but players can't take account of information that isn't tied to the game experience. This happens right now in my native game of CSGO. In CSGO, right, we have a problem with the economy currently where basically it's not enough that the counter-terrorist wins the round. His guns are more expensive. So he also has to stay alive and win the round. But no one plays that way because your entire life playing Counter-Strike tells you just the round, isn't it? The round's the score. So as long as we win the round, we win the round, right? That's good. But it isn't always as good as it needs to be. And basically, I think the same thing's going to happen in League. You can't, like a player, I'm sorry, especially the fucking jungler, he can't be totally cognizant of all times, as well as the map, what the lane states are, what the current macro situation, timers on Herald, and he can't also be going, and of course, I might have a shutdown on me, and then they have a bounty, like, he can't be doing the fucking numbers meme of like the numbers mason, the numbers, like, he's just a fucking human playing a video game. Like, it's all well and good going, players should adapt. Like, this is too much, I think. I don't think a player can keep that information. Because as I say, it's kind of like, it's not directly connected to your game experience. Nothing like, put it this way, it's not like your champion feels stronger in the game, so intuitively wow, I must have like a shutdown if I get killed. No, I think basically this will just affect games like this, but I don't think a player can really. I don't think you can counterplay it in a way. I don't think. I know it's possible, but I don't think it's reasonable to expect even pros to think this way.
But it's not, especially because, like, sure, in retrospect, we can say, well, they probably should have started the dragon stacking earlier. Like, they probably really should have, with their poke composition, focused on this objective and not pursued Peanut so much, because there is catch-up XP in the jungle that Peanut can earn. It's like, you can only suppress him for so long is the reality of it. Like, after that first clear, I think you got to find something better for Canyon to do with his time and start stacking those objectives. However, in the moment of the game, it feels so right. Like, when I'm watching it, I'm like, holy shit, this is going well.
Dude, think about how many games you've played against a fucking Hecarim comp, and you're thinking, dude, if we can keep this guy down early, it's over. But like, every other game's telling you, play this way, you're winning, you can't win against you.
I mean, it's like they weren't making bad decisions.
No.
In terms of snowballing, they were making extremely good decisions. So let's just put this out there. Like, let's put everything in context. Okay, you have the Ziggs in the bot lane. You've got to push onto the Ornn with the Renekton in the top lane. You have freedom to invade both sides of the jungle. Canyon can basically do whatever he wants, go wherever he pleases. They even get a kill on Chovy in the mid lane, so Showmaker starts to get up, right? Now, if you're going to be in this situation, they're trying to expand their gold lead very quickly. So they're prioritizing. It's not that they weren't doing nothing, guys. It's that they were prioritizing killing turrets. They got all the plates in the game. They have a Ziggs with a satchel charge. So what they were doing is they were moving the Ziggs from lane to lane to go ahead and bust down all these turrets. They get the Heralds. Now, crucially, one thing that you'll notice they don't do is put the Herald in the bot lane, because they don't want to accidentally take the inhibitor when there's only one turret left in the bot lane. Then they move top, put the Herald in the top lane, take that turret, and then it crashes into the inhibitor turret. So they're very systematically moving the Ziggs around the map and taking every single little bit of gold, trying to get all that gold from the tier 2 turrets in the side lanes, trying to get all the plate damage. They're using the Ziggs very well. Now, what is the cost of this, right? Because you have to have the Ziggs and the Jace and the Nidalee in the same lane, because they're trying to poke people off the turrets and take these objectives. What ends up happening is that you get a lot of farm onto Ruler. as a result. He is up by like 100 CS by the time that he starts to like come online and get super powerful. He's got 3 items, by the end of this sequence, and that allows the door to be open, especially when he gets like 1,000 gold shutdown onto the Nidalee, and they're able to start coming back. But it's not like Damwon was doing a bad job of snowballing. Like they weren't.
No.
But it's only in retrospect that we could say that, because I don't think people in the game would have called their decision making bad. It was using Zig's satchel charge in the lead that they had to snowball, get a fuck ton of gold from the map, and they weren't even doing dumb shit like taking inhibitors. They weren't even like, they were thinking about that and saying, we're not going to take this inhibitor, we're not going to drop the Herald here, we're going to use it somewhere else. It was a really beautiful game to watch, honestly. And like, the fact that we have to nitpick this and say that, holy shit, it was actually possible to come back in this game. Like there is a fundamental problem with the game mechanics if it is possible to come back without a titanic error. And Damwon did not make a titanic error in this game.
But here's the analogy, because I know fans are thinking like, yeah, but it's not that one thing that got... No, but that one thing made the game almost even, and then the following mistakes lost the game. This is like if in football you're up 4-0 at half time, but in the second half each goal's worth 4 goals, so you score one time. It's like what the fuck was I playing for in the first half? Like, that's just stupid at that point. That's what it feels like right now, is basically the analogy if people don't get it.
Yeah, and look, there were problems with Damwon. Like, they were missing a lot of skill shots. They weren't landing the Nidalee Spears. They weren't landing the Shock Blast from Jace. They weren't landing the
Showmaker was definitely missing a fucking everything, wasn't he?
Yeah, so like, had they been able to hit their poke, that could have changed the outcome of the game as well. But again, we're talking about a beautiful macro sequence that resulted in a 10,000 gold lead that should be rewarded more than it was within this game.
Yeah. No, that's what it is. And as you pointed out, it's simply that you basically have to calculate how far you want to snowball, instead of like, just, do I want to, like, we have to snowball. Like, that should be the equation. Should be, do we have to snowball? Yes, our comp requires that. But at this point, you have to keep track of like the 2 things, right? It's a jungle XP. Like, if you 2 levels down, you're going to get the jungle XP, come back, and you have the comeback XP. And the same way as the inhibitor, like, too, in the bounty system too, like the inhibitor system is also really broken if we think about it. Why would one be punished if one takes an inhib too early? Like, that is actually a punishment. That shouldn't be the case. You literally have to send one guy to that lane that you take an inhib on and hope that he gets the XP of the dying minions, because the jungle XP actually doesn't, because again of the fact that junglers as well as laners get different amount of XPs in the enemy jungle, and you set the enemy jungle far behind, you literally, by snowballing in the enemy jungle and taking the jungle camps, you put your own team in jeopardy of giving free jungle XP out again. And the inhib minions that are now crashing into your nexus. So it's like, why would one implement this and continuously try to kill off the early game potential without, like, what is the design behind it? And that's what I'm trying to figure out. Like, I have not had an answer to it, because to me, the early game items do feel a bit strong. I think that's probably it. But it also should just be, then you just have to nerf the items, or have to nerf how XP works in the early game. I mean, something has to happen, something has to change. It cannot be the way that it is now, where you get punished for being too good, like in a lot of ways. You're being punished for being too good initially, and if you make one mistake, that is worse than being too good earlier.
Yeah. Also doesn't fit with, like, here's one of my problems I've always had, is I don't believe, like, the game dev doesn't have to explain themselves, but if you do attempt to explain yourself, I will listen to the reasons and in good faith apply it. And if I find you full of shit, then I'll call you out on it. So here's the problem I have, right? Here's the problem, Monte. Why can we never have nice things in League of Legends? Because the game has to look like the solo queue experience, Monte. In solo queue, every fucking elo ADC is taking that inhib if it is available. Every single time, because in his brain, he doesn't even understand macroning, he's low elo, he just thinks it's better. I took his inhib. Right? You're now doing pro games where, as we're talking, it is now incorrect to take inhibitors at certain points in time. So how does that fit with your whole thing that's going to look like casual play? It's nothing like casual play. This is, by the way, just as bad as the old lane swaps. It's just as bad as lane swaps that you all wanted out of the game. Like, that'll never make sense to a casual either, even though I was very powerful for pro player.
I mean, it's crazy that Ruler could get up by that much CS while not even having the inhib down, right? And imagine how much worse it would have been had the inhibitor be down in that circumstance. Now, again, part of it is going to be Yuumi is a gross, disgusting scaling champion.
Helps. That certainly helps. Certainly, you notice, by the way, 2 of the biggest comebacks of the season, Monte.
The Misfits one as well.
You'll notice it did have a little steroid accelerator pad on that fucking blue shell, didn't it? Exactly.
It's also, I think, the composition, like, it's really hard for the Leona or Renekton to actually not just get completely owned by Yuumi Xayah. Like we saw a lot of the picks coming off onto the Killen's Leona in the last game, because they just kind of stand there and they didn't really have super good engage. So if the poke isn't landing, the tanks just kind of have to stand there and get poked themselves over time, or get CC'd and then kind of focused down by the composition that we saw from Gen G. So, they had to catch the game, and like they did do it extremely well. If you look at it, like especially actually collecting resources on the map in a very difficult situation, Ruler was extraordinary this game. Like, it's not possible without Ruler getting all that farm, and he did it really, really well in a tough situation. But I think it is disappointing to see games like this, because after watching this, who the fuck is going to play an early game composition ever again? Yeah. Like, I'm scared off of this forever after watching that game if I'm a professional team. At this level of stakes in an LCK semifinal with this level of dominance, and frankly, like, not that many mistakes, and you still get your ass handed to you, like, it's the value just isn't there. The value is not there.
By the way, one thing I did think this series showed, though, so we'll tie it in if you want, we can talk about the final, and then after that we'll go to LEC. Basically, another thing, because right now anyone who saw LEC playoffs knows that, like, spoiler, thus far at least, Caps actually hasn't shown up as the old Caps that everyone's still praying comes back. He's just a different player at the moment, and is like, I would just say, like, the carry threat is just drastically reduced. He's not like a monster player he once was. He's just a good mid laner now, right? Dude, Showmaker's given me the same fucking vibe in LCK this split. Yes, his teammates are worse. Yes, the meta is different. This guy was remember, before they lost that final, people were putting him next to Faker, Rookie, like the greatest players of all time. They were asking how many more worlds does he have to win before Showmaker can be the GOAT. So this is one of the things I always say about these players. People will always make this mistake. When they compare a legendary player who's had his whole career to a player who was in his prime now, they always make the mistake of not getting. Well, at the end, your career has like a bell curve. You're at your best, you're at the beginning, you're at your peak, and everyone almost ends lower down. That's why you retire. So the problem people have is when you're in the middle at the peak, Caps, Showmaker, you think it never end. You think he'll always be that good. Or you think even if he gets worse, he'll be the second best. He'll be 9 out of 10 instead of 10 out of 10. What this shows is these are just humans. Like, it's very rare you're going to get players like Rookie and Uzi and think like go that many years. Like, even other great players are going to have a year or two that are really good, and then they're going to have a split that's down, or a split that's a slump, or they don't have the right team. Because, like, Showmaker right now, nobody would think this guy was the best in the world after that series. It's over.
Or the split.
For now. So I have the same vibe with him. Like, this guy was on top of the world, but far from it right now. Far from it.
Look, I think the Dom one's actually in a kind of rough spot. Because you
got to chop a bunch of these players, dude.
No. I think you just need to get Nuggery back, frankly, because they ended up in a top carry meta where it was very difficult for them to play through the top lane. I mean, you see that in this series. They replace Birdall with Hoya. Hoya hasn't played a stage match since January. Like, he's been gone for a long time, and they put him in game 3 of a semifinal match, and yeah, comes in, actually does a lot of good work on the Camille, right? Yeah. It's not that he played well. He got caught out on the Camille a few times. Like, he made mistakes that were costly in terms of split pushing, but his individual power, especially in the laning phase, you can see that their game plan was suddenly switched to trying to accelerate through the top lane, which is the way that a lot of good teams are playing right now. But you have to have the player to do that. And it's been tough for them. And I think that, I think Gen G also has issues in the top lane.
Everyone does.
Yeah. I mean, Zeus is good. Keen's pretty good, but Keen is not on the greatest roster right now. But it's kind of a weaker top lane split overall. Rascal had a very good season, but he's on a garbage team. So we can't have like a lot of the good players good top laners on the top rosters. And I think that if there is a glaring flaw in this series, maybe Hoya can become that guy in time, right? But he's still not playing he doesn't play with his lead super well compared to a lot of other top laners. And how can you expect him to do that in a high pressure situation where he's just thrown into game 3. Like, it's not really fair to him either. And I also don't even necessarily believe that Berdahl was a huge issue in the Malphite game that ostensibly got him benched, because the Malphite wasn't really good into the Gen G Cup. It was good in lane versus Jace, but it's, you know, they picked it really early, and then Gen G countered with a Kai'Sa pick, and it's like, then Malphite had to build, like, he built Chem Tank, Merc Treads, and then went Force of Nature, which, like, that just fucking feels bad on Malphite. Like, that feels bad. And so I think they kind of overplayed the Malphite in the draft into a composition that still had flexibility in order to get around it. And then Damwon also set themselves up in a lot of bad positions and re-engaged fights when Malphite didn't have ultimate. And it was pretty easy, I think, for Gen G to play a kite game against them, and they had enough upfront CC to stop the Malphite. So this is all to say that I don't really think that was Berdahl's fault. I think it was like a team and draft fault. Like, they played it badly as a team.
Listen, here's the problem though, Monte. Berdahl, I made a video about this recently. Berdahl can't be just okay though. Who is he replacing? Fucking Nagori and Khan, two of the greatest players ever to play the position in the history of the game.
It's not good, right?
And this team's entire identity, the whole time they've been down one, is we are the top side of the map. Our whole fucking shit is the mid laner and jungler of the shit, and hopefully the top lane is really good. So you bring in Berdahl, a guy who just inted his face off on Gen G at fucking Worlds. Brilliant, yeah. This guy almost let European teams get out the fucking group. That's what he was all about. So,
oh my God.
And also, you say that, Monty, they just have to introduce one of the best top laners of all time. Like, oh, is that all? Like, fucking hell. Like, we can fix a lot of teams.
I mean,
give me the shopping list and that money, I'll go fix half the teams in the world.
But my point is like, this team really wanted to play through carry top in this series. That's why Hoya went in, right? And because that's the meta. And like, we can chain this later on into, what did Odo Omni say on this show last week? Well, no teams in Europe are really playing through the top lane carries. What happened this last week in LEC playoffs? Well, a lot more teams were playing through the top lane, including Rogue, and playing top lane carries, much more so than we saw during the regular split. That has been a big change in Europe that was certainly, you know, part of the shift that we saw as they changed patches, but also as they had time to kind of digest the other regions. So clearly, Damwon said, us playing, you know, the Malphite top lane, or playing weak side top, or playing just kind of counterpicking the top lane, let's put it that way, but maybe not having the ideal pick. That's not how we want to play. We want to play for a kind of split push composition with the Camille. We want to play through the top lane. We want to have the Renekton famous, you know, combo with Nidalee so that we can accelerate this early game, so that Canyon can have pressure and can invade, and we can get these leads. It was a clear game plan. And like, I don't think you can fault the game plan that Damwon had, but it would have been objectively better with Noguri, right? And Noguri took a break. I fully anticipate Noguri to come back for summer on this Damwon roster, because I think he was, from what I understand, he was close to signing anyway, and coming back to Damwon before he decided that he needed a little bit of a break. But
it sounded like he had some like mental health thing going on. It didn't sound like it was not wanting to play. Yeah.
But if you're Noguri and you're watching this series, you can't, if you're a real competitor, you can't help but want to come back. You're like, oh my God, these guys were one game away from the finals. I get to play carries in this meta as long as this meta persists, which it should, because of TP changes, frankly. Like, I think we can continue to see this, because unless they revert TP changes, but I don't think a lot of patching is necessarily going to change kind of the ability for top laners to carry. So if I'm Noguri and I'm looking at this, I'm like, licking my lips. I want to come back into this game. I want to, you know, show how good I am. I want to challenge T1 in a meaningful way. And I like Dokdam and Kellen. I think that they were, you know, they showed a lot last year in terms of their performance. I think that maybe it feels kind of bad to use the Ziggs in this game, but they used the Ziggs well with the way that they wanted to play out this game. I'm not sure it's necessarily Dokdam's meta, because he's known as like this Ezreal monster, and we talked about it a little bit earlier, but Ezreal like randomly became a priority pick because of the Ezreal karma emphasis that both of these teams wanted to go for. But that was like I think that was a micro meta just in this best of 5, and not really reflective of how many other teams are going to be playing their series on this patch. But I don't know. I think it looks like time for Noguri to come back, and the storyline would be absolutely insane if T1 wins this season, and then Noguri's like, I'm here to challenge your dominance and end the streak, right? That's pretty baller. Also, Rascal can come back to Gen G.
The problem is, like, I wanted to ask us, what do you think? Like, I'm assuming everyone's picking T1 to win the final. So the real question for me now is just, do they go undefeated? Can they 3-0 the final?
I don't think so.
It really, I mean, quite frankly, I think Gen G has had. I mean, I don't think they will have any kind of grand comebacks, but I do think there will be one game where there's going to be slight misexecution at some point, or they're going to have like it's the cheesy hacker room comeback after being 20 CS down or whatever it is, and actually make one play, and then it turns a bit, because they do have the individual ability to actually challenge T1 in some roads, at least I would say, in the mid to late game. It's not like they're bad at team fighting. They're pretty good at team fighting. They actually understand their roles pretty clearly. The only difference is that their early to mid game execution seems to be lackluster compared to T1's, where it's really surgical. So I don't know. I think 3-1. I would call out T1 3-1.
Yeah, I think there are ways to win. There are ways to win. I mean, I alluded to them earlier. Gen G is a early dragon focused team. That's been their identity. If they opt into handshake trades with T1, who wants to go for the early Herald, and they force an extremely early Dragon stack, I honestly do wonder whether T1 is going to do stuff like ban Karma, because having Ezreal Karma and having hard shove lanes allows you to have an easier time stacking early dragons. So there is that possibility that there could just be an early soul game, or a kind of a disastrous dragon soul fight for T1 if they can't get into position, that could, with the right dragon soul, accelerate the game into a win for Gen G. I think Gen G will win at least one game.
Because my main issue is, I also think like they should be good for one game. I mean, at the end of the day, we have Chovy and Ruler. Like, you can just have a game where they get their picks and get a couple of kills and just in a good spot and win the game. Like, it's not like no one can conceive of a Chovy carry game. My problem is this, though. I actually think the reason it's not as implausible as people think it could be a 3-0 is because I actually think the Korean regional final, I mean, the problem is when I say that now, people are going to think I mean like the old qualifier. I mean just like the final of the domestic league of LCK is one of the ones that has the most 3-0 finals, because when you're down 2-0, the amount of pressure on you, I don't think it's anything like it. I think maybe Worlds should be the only, Worlds finals the only comparison. The amount of time teams are down 0-2 and they just capitulate completely in game 3, even in the draft half the time. Like, that's the reason it could be a 3-0. So I guess we'll see early on if Chovy, I think they have to sort of win one of the first 2 games, basically. If they can do it, look, I still think T1 wins, but I would say, I don't know, I'm kind of torn on which side to go on that one. Kind of torn on that one. Want to see more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.